if you, like me, have one of those dates that whenever it comes around on the calendar, you're thinking, what's going to happen this time? Welcome everyone, Bruchim Aba'im. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. Welcome to Beit Virtuali and another iterative process video as we step now into the 9th of Av. Now, depending on which stream of Judaism you associate with or you identify with, the 9th of Av is either a central day in your liturgical calendar or not very important at all. And I have heard suggested that, well, this is something, why should we mourn? Because the destruction of temples, do we really want to have a temple again, a sacrificial system? And I hope that for most of us the answer is no. We have replaced that with a system of sacrificing our time, giving of our hearts, avodah belev. Our prayer, our service has taken over what was once the service of the Kohanim, the Levites in the temple. But I couldn't actually disagree with that more profoundly. And I'll try to get into the reasons a little bit as we get into the questions that we should be answering on 9th of Av. If you haven't seen an iterative process video before, links down below. The idea is all of our holidays in Judaism are real and a part of our psychology, and there is something demanded of us every time we reach a new commemoration or a holiday to ask questions and then do something about the answers we get from those questions. And one of the reasons that I disagree so profoundly with the idea that this should not be a central observance, well, we start off with the fact that it's not just the destruction of the temples that we commemorate on this day. According to the Mishnah, this is in Mishnah Ta'anit, we find out that there are traditionally five, what are called the five calamities that are spoken of that happened on or around the 9th of Av. The first of which is the return of the spies from the land of Canaan. Now that turned out to be a calamity because of all of the fear and complaining. It turned out to be the punishment of spending 40 years in the wilderness and having an entire generation die out before we could enter into the promised land. The second calamity was the destruction of the first temple in 586 BCE by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. The third calamity then is the destruction of the second temple in 70 of the Common Era by the Romans, followed by a series of what we call the Roman-Jewish Wars, where roughly half of all Jews on the face of this planet were killed, and then we end up with the finale of that, the Bar Kokhba Rebellion. So the quashing of the Bar Kokhba Rebellion happening on 9th of Av, 135 of the Common Era, and then the fifth calamity being the plowing under the complete destruction of the temple grounds. All of Jerusalem was renamed, and Jews couldn't visit it other than on the 9th of Av. It's renamed Aelia Capitolina. Judea was renamed Palestina, and any bit of agency we had in our most sacred spot was lost for quite some time. But it doesn't stop at the five calamities. Much like my opening comments, this seems to be one of those dates where just one thing after another horrific event has happened to us over the course of time. And not going to go into every single one of them, but several expulsions, expulsion from Spain, expulsion from England, expulsion from France, they all happened around the 9th of Av, the 7th, 10th, and 9th of Av. The beginning of the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto, that was 9th of Av in 1941, and the list just goes on. And so this seems to have a specific psychic weight to it that is just painful and devastating. And so to avoid it and say that this tiny part of this day, which represents a part of Judaism that we just don't want to have anything to do with anymore, is a reason that we should not engage, I think limits us to what this is actually about. Now, if you've never experienced the 9th of Av in a very traditional commemoration, the sitting on the floor and the reading of the Book of Lamentations and the fasting, it is worth trying at least once. And there's a lot of ways to do it. And put comments in the links down below, and I'm more than happy to try to guide anyone who wants to try to find a place where you can have a meaningful 9th of Av experience. But the purpose of this video is to look at what is the metaphorical, the symbolic, the practical purpose to experience at an individual level a 9th of Av. And the key word in all this is a word from yoga, shavasana, a word from Sanskrit, I should say. And anyone who's ever experienced Shavasana, anyone who's done yoga, Shavasana is known as the death pose. And it's a pose where you are essentially rehearsing for how your body will be at the moment of death. And to Western ears, that might sound a bit macabre, except for look at the truth that's inside that. So as a congregational rabbi, I haven't quite done 100 funerals yet, but I'm really close. It's one of the reasons that I'm happy to be doing a virtual synagogue for quite some time because, oh my goodness, that will just take it out of you. But the people who really take something out of, and this should be obvious, are the people that are mourning, but it's not as obvious as you think. The amount of times that I've had people who have lost someone dear to them who come up and say, I don't know what to do. There's no easy way to say, then I can't help you. And if that sounds really, really cruel, and I do try to say it much nicer than that, what I really mean by that is, if you want to use Jewish ritual tradition and to have a Jewish community around you at a time of death, that actually requires practice, spiritual practice, actually knowing what Jewish ritual tradition is. It's no sense on trying to be comforted through Jewish ritual tradition if we've never actually tried it before. And second of all, if we've seen synagogues as a place only to pay dues for a few years so that we can see a bar mitzvah happen, then we've missed out on the fact that between all the various different clubs we belong to, the one who is going to gather around us when we most need it is going to be our religious community or our community of spiritual expression. And Judaism, in all life cycle events, I think especially death, which Judaism does with great wisdom, it is filled with those external symbols that point us to deeper internal realities. So traditionally speaking, we sit lower. I know that it's traditional in many American communities to have the rabbi bring smaller chairs, but really it's about sitting on the floor. And yeah, if that seems uncomfortable, I don't care. The symbol is we in this moment when we've lost someone, we are brought low. We are on the ground for 7 days, followed by 30 days, and then depending, followed by 300 days. We have a job. The job is to mourn. Why is that our job, to mourn? Because if we don't mourn, then that amount of mourning will be with us the rest of our lives. One of the visualizations I try to give people is just visualize mourning as a cube of something, blackness, darkness, difficulty, maybe even light and rainbows, depending on how you want to look at it. But either way, there's this amount. This is an absolute amount of mourning we have to experience in order to get to the other side. And we're going to get over that in either a little less than a year or over the course of the rest of our lives. So if we sit there and we're stoic and we don't show emotion and we don't really take the mourning ritual seriously, then we're going to get this much out of the way. And then we wonder why 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, we're still having dreams and nightmares about that person we've lost. We still have guilt feeling. We find ourselves being physically affected. Dealing with the most difficult stuff, the shadow, requires practice. It requires powerful symbols. It requires ritual. And when someone has died, we are brought low. Whether we want to express it or experience it or not, we are on the ground. And is it any wonder that for the 9th of Av, traditionally, we sit on the floor? I've done it at a few synagogues that I've been at, turned the chairs upside down to invite people who are physically able to sit on the floor with me as we read Echa, the book of Lamentations. And it's really uncomfortable. And it should be uncomfortable because the iterative process of Tisha B'Av is beginning the preparation for the most guaranteed reality of life, that we are going to be in mourning. And if this sounds opposite of what you expect on a virtual synagogue page that is trying to get viewership, well, it's because we're used to people trying to sell that happiness is the meaning of life. And I'm just wondering where we actually started believing that. Oh, we have rituals in Judaism, thank goodness, to help us dance and jump for joy and to experience and to highlight and put weight on those moments of happiness. And we should be around people who are able to celebrate with us when we enter that as well. But if we don't acknowledge that the nature of life is oftentimes punctuations of tragedy within that, then we are going to be even more miserable because life will never live up to our fantasies. And if we're going to be able to survive and thrive and grow and become greater through that, then we need to practice tragedy. Exactly as Shavasana is the practice for preparation into a peaceful death, the 9th of Av is our opportunity to tear our garments and weep and learn how to do that. If you're a human being who's never cried in your life, who you've been taught you have to keep in your emotions, and you, God forbid, lose a parent, you don't know what to do. You have never practiced that. And Judaism says, no, This is so important. Judaism is not a Western religion of stoicism. It is a religion of showing your emotions in the appropriate times in the appropriate ways. We have blessings for it. It doesn't mean that we understand what's happening. It is our obligation when we go to a house of mourning to shut up, to let the person who's in mourning speak to us, not to offer frivolous and silly aphorisms in that moment, because nothing that we can say will help. Nothing we can do will help other than being present. Judaism isn't about giving answers so we can understand what's happening. It's about giving us the rituals so that we can learn through the process of what we're experiencing. And so the first iterative process question of the 9th of Av, of Tisha B'Av, is, what has broken my heart this year that I have not mourned? The second question is, am I doing anything to prepare myself to be able to ritually and as a human and individual move through the shadow as it occurs in my life? And finally, do I have a community around me that I'm going to trust when I go through the deepest and darkest things? But right now, every one of you who is watching this, I am so grateful for you. Beit Virtuali was never meant, however, to be a standalone. It is meant to be a supplement of education, of thoughts, to help you have deeper practice from within your own community. So many people are leaving their synagogues because no synagogue is the perfect place that we would draw up in our dream journal. And I've got news for us all. No rabbi is ideal. No synagogue is ideal. If you're coming to this from outside of Judaism, no church, no mosque, no temple, no sweat lodge is ideal. They're filled with human beings. We all are human beings who will make mistakes. But within that process of making mistakes, we still surround ourselves with people who in that moment when we need them will be there. And as much as I am a rabid Philadelphia Eagles fan, I don't think it's necessarily going to be the other people living in Germany who have jerseys of our favorite quarterback. If God forbid I lose someone in my life, I am going to first of all go to my rabbi, and then I'm going to make sure that I've got a minion around me, and I'm going to get on the floor and I'm going to rip my shirt and I'm going to cry. And I'm going to keep on crying and keep on crying. And so if we are not ready to do that, the iterative process of Tisha B'Av is the reminder to ask ourselves each year, have we done anything to understand that we will be mourning at some point in the future? Now, an acknowledgement before we leave this. This has been hard. This has been dark. This is not the joyous, uplifting thing that I try to do, at least on occasion. That's on purpose. We've been in this 10-day period and 3 haftarot that have been telling us, well, just how awful of humans actually can be. Once we get through this, then the liturgical calendar changes. But when we get to the other side, we start lifting ourselves up again into the light. We've got what are called the Shev de Nechemta, the 7 weeks of Nechama, the consolation, where we hear one haftarah after another, the prophetic readings after the Torah reading that are filled with comfort. But the comfort doesn't happen unless we have first gone to that de profundus, that from the depths I call unto you, eternal. So if you're fasting this day, may it be meaningful, but let it also be active with understanding that this is a part of who we are and a part of who we need to be and become. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time. Mourn,